Welcome to a special edition of the Atheist and Christian Book Club. And we're doing this in conjunction with the Reasonable Faith chapter of the University of Texas at Dallas, which is where we are right now, live. We don't do in-person book clubs like we used to before COVID. So this is great to get everybody. We're actually seeing faces and not just Zoom videos. So let me just take a minute to talk about what we're going to try to do. My name is James Walker. I'm a co-founder of the Atheist and Christian Book Club. I'm a Christian part of that equation. And I'm also president of Watchman Fellowship, which is an evangelical Christian apologetics group focusing mostly on interfaith evangelism. But I met this guy named Bill Cluck, who's an atheist, about 6 or 7 years ago. And we kind of hit it off. He introduced me to the leadership of Metroplex Atheist in Arlington, where I live. And we just kind of got to be friends. I went to, for about a year, I went to their meetings and got to know a lot of them. And out of that came this idea, we need to do a book club because we need to have more Christians and atheists talking and discussing things and not just yelling things back and forth in passing. So I'll introduce Bill Cluck in just a moment, but the book club came out of that idea. And so we've been doing that. What we do is we usually do a book and we try to have the author present with us of the book, and we'll alternate a Christian book one month, an atheist book the next month. And so one of the things that we try to do is have civil conversation, and we hope that is also going to work here at UTD, that we try to keep it nice. We don't want to avoid hard questions. We love tough questions, but we don't want snarkiness or don't give us a piece of your mind, especially if you can't afford to give us a piece of your mind. So anyway, that's where we're coming from on this. And so Bill Cluck, you'll meet in a moment. He is the atheist, former Christian, now atheist, and he is the atheist part of the Atheist and Christian Book Club. And we used to have pretty much about half and half. I think the Christians in the last year have been slightly outnumbering our atheist guests, our club members rather. But we do have a number of our regular atheists joining us by Zoom right now. And we are really thankful to be able to partner with the UTD chapter of the Reasonable Faith and with Alan Hainline. Alan is a friend and one of our authors. Alan participated in a book, an anthology called The Story of the Cosmos. Daniel Ray's a co-editor of that book. He's here with us and one of our staff members as well. So Alan wrote a chapter in that book, and he's been one of our guest authors on the Atheist and Christian Book Club. But he's also the leader of the chapter here, Reasonable Faith. And thank you, Alan, for letting us be a part of that. I'm going to ask Alan, since this is his event, and I'd like to give him a participation to kind of take my place. Usually I'm co-moderating. So just a moment, I'm going to ask Alan and Bill to come up here and be by our speaker. Now, our guest speaker has been one of our favorites, and he's coming from a Christian perspective. But Tim McGrew is the atheists love him maybe more than some of the Christians. So you've been, I don't know how that happened, but you are a favorite amongst the book club. And so this is maybe what, your third or fourth time to be a part of our book club. So Tim is Christian philosopher, professor of philosophy at Western Michigan University in Kalamazoo. His research interests include epistemology, the history of philosophy and science, philosophy of religion. He's a specialist in the philosophical approach to probability theory. That's probably true, right? Probably. Okay, very likely. It either is or it isn't. So he's going to be, we're not doing a book per se on this one, so it's kind of unusual, but a lot of his talk and the conversation is going to be based on the other Dr. McGrew, his wife, Lydia, who's her recent book, Testimonies to Truth, Why You Can Trust the Gospels. And so if we have any questions about how trustworthy the Gospels are, this is the time to ask your questions about that. And whether you're atheist or Christian, like I said, just remember to keep them civil. Have I left something out? Okay, if you're watching by Zoom, technology, this is kind of difficult to get this to work. We're not going to be able to bring you in and put you on the screen, but we do want you to participate. So if you're watching by Zoom and you have a question, text that in. There's a place at the bottom that you can text a message in. Brady Blevins, who's one of our staff, or either Daniel Ray, who's producing this, will be able to see that, and we will read your question for Dr. McGrew. And so we want you to be a part of that and participate, either streaming or here in the class as well. We're going to have Dr. McGrew talk with us about this whole topic for 30, 45 minutes. Take as much time as you want. And write your questions down, and then what I want you or do something to help remember your questions, and we want to have a discussion afterwards, which is my favorite part of the book club. Thanks so much.
Thanks a lot, James. Yes, welcome to everyone that's able to be with us here, whether on Zoom or in person. We're very excited to be able to have Tim McGrew in all the way from Michigan, good friend of mine, and I think you'll find him to be a very engaging speaker and hopefully question to answer. So yeah, if anybody coming off campus for your first time here, especially, we welcome you. And just mention that we do have regular meetings every Thursday night here. We welcome the public to our Reasonable Faith meetings. So anyone is welcome to attend that. We will be off for Thanksgiving though next week. So yeah, take it away, Tim.
All right. What nobody has mentioned is that it's not hard to get me to come to Texas. All you have to say is, "Hey Tim, I hear it's cold up there in Calvin." I'm lost. I'll be there in a moment. Is there anything else that you guys need me to do by way of like screen sharing or anything, or are we just going to go the way that it is now? Okay, just checking the tech stuff. So thank you. I have always had an enjoyable and a vigorous time when I'm down here for the Atheist and Christian Book Club. In no small part due to the fact that the atheists actually have questions and they like to ask them, and then they listen to the answers. And that's a valuable skill that I wish more people would cultivate, and I think that's one of the beautiful things that's come out of the fact that you brought the groups together, is that you've learned actually how to have conversations. That may not sound like a lot, but I intend it as a high compliment, particularly when you look at what passes for conversation sometimes these days. Maybe recent events have jogged your memory as to just how bad we can be at doing that. So kudos to these guys. They do it well, and I enjoy it. Even when they try to poleaxe me, which they are not above doing. So this is
keeps it interesting.
It absolutely keeps it interesting. So I have been on their menu several times, and I am still here and alive to tell the tale. All limbs currently attached. So I feel pretty good about that. I do want to give you a sampler of what is in this book that my wife has produced, Testimonies to the Truth. This is her most recent, the fourth of the books that she's put out like this. And it is one of the relatively short ones, weighing in at only, I don't know, 245 pages or so. The big ones go over 500, and they are sort of the quarries out of which she has chiseled some of the things that she's put in here. These are subjects that we've been discussing for a long time. One of the things that drew me back into the study of apologetics is the fact that I discovered the mother lode of older resources. And the older resources are not necessarily outdated at all. There are, of course, some old and outdated books, but old atheist books are sometimes outdated as well. But some of the fundamental lines of argument are really interesting, and we should never have lost them. So this book is a contribution toward the project of trying to pull these back in for discussion. I cannot possibly cover everything in the book, so I'm going to select a few categories, and then I am going to select a few examples from those categories. And then at a certain point, I will just stop talking and let you guys take over and ask questions. So don't be shy. It's okay. If I was unclear about something, that's a great first question. Like, you said this, but I'm not sure what you meant. Give me another crack at it. I'll do what I can with it. So the book is entitled Testimonies to the Truth. It's an exploration of 8 lines of evidence, 2 of them external, 6 of them internal, supporting the claim that the Gospels and the Book of Acts are historically reliable documents, that they are reportage from people who were close to the facts and habitually truthful. That is not everyone's position about these documents, but we're making a case here that it is. And the case is worth consideration, maybe even especially if you are not inclined to agree with it. Think about it. Ask yourself this question, which all atheists and all Christians should be willing to ask. When should I change my mind? Think about that. Answer it honestly. Abide by all consequences of your answer, and I'll take my chances. So let's first look at a little map. I like to put a map of apologetics up like this because I think that the welter of questions and arguments can become bewildering. So I like to split it into general apologetics, things that a Christian, a Muslim, a devout Jew could all agree on. Monotheism, right? Is there a God? That's the general side. And then over on the specific side, we're dealing with scripture, specifically the Christian scriptures, which include both the Jewish scriptures and the New Testament. And then top to bottom, we can divide it into positive arguments. So over here, positive arguments for the existence of God. Over there on the top, positive arguments for the authenticity and trustworthiness of the Christian scriptures. And then responses to objections. There are challenges to theism, right? The concept of God is incoherent, some people think. The problem of evil is an enormous problem for any kind of theism where God is supposed to be good. The problem of divine hiddenness, why isn't God more obvious? Objections to reported miracles, are they really credible, or did David Hume destroy that? Those kinds of things show up over there. And also just sort of imperial scientism, right? Now, in this age of science, God is out of a job, so runs the claim. On the right-hand side, in the defensive or responses to objections, that are responses to criticisms of Scripture. There are claims of contradictions, historical errors, scientific errors, moral objections, and so forth. And so apologetics works in all four quadrants. But tonight, we want to look at the upper right quadrant, the arguments for the authenticity and trustworthiness of the Christian scriptures. That doesn't mean you can't raise other questions as we go into the Q&A session, but I'm probably going to try to give priority to questions that pertain to that, and that's where I'm going to be trying to make a positive case. So why does it matter? Well, if the Gospels are reliable historical documents, then they're not late and embellished documents. If they're not late and embellished, then the accounts of Jesus' resurrection are plausibly what the witnesses claimed. The content of their claims makes it implausible that the witnesses were just honestly mistaken. They're very specific things that are as hard to be mistaken about as it's hard for you to be mistaken about the question of when you last hung out with a good friend of yours. Can you remember the day? Do you remember something that you did? They're not esoteric metaphysical claims. They're very down-to-earth physical claims that your senses pertain to. The context, the hostile context in which those claims were promoted makes it implausible that they were deliberately making it up. And if you think out the logic of it, there are three options. Either the claims are true or they're false. If they're false, either the people promoting them knew that they were false, so they were making it up, or they didn't know that they were false, so they were honestly mistaken. The force of many of these pieces of evidence is to render it implausible that either of those latter two is the case. So that's the logical structure of the reasoning. So here are some categories of evidence that I will run through, trying not to keep you all here desperately long. Specific locations that are mentioned in the Gospels, customs and culture that are mentioned in the Gospels, undesigned coincidences. Maybe some of you have heard some of these before. Unnecessary details, which are a mark of authenticity in storytelling. And finally, actually not quite finally, unexplained allusions, and then the unified personality of Jesus and others as well. Peter, Thomas, Mary, Martha, all show up as distinctive, but I'm going to focus on the personality of Jesus for this presentation. Others are covered in the book. So I'm going to try to make the case that in each of these 6 lines of evidence, we have credible pieces of evidence that point us toward the conclusion that this is reported from honest people who are close to the facts. I haven't claimed that this is an argument for inspiration. I haven't claimed that this is an argument for inerrancy, but I am claiming that these documents bear many marks of being as trustworthy as, say, Boswell's Life of Samuel Johnson. They come either directly or it may be one removed from people who followed Jesus around and knew him personally. Locations. Locations are hard. I'm not talking about things like there was a city named Jerusalem. That's a soft focus kind of location. But remember, we're working in a world without Wikipedia. So if someone shows an intimate knowledge of specific locations, this is not easy to fake. That doesn't mean that what he's saying is necessarily true about what happened at those locations. That is correct. But it does depress the probability of a claim that these were written much, much later by people who never met Jesus and who didn't witness any of the purported events that they're now recounting. And there's a specific reason for that. In the ancient world, there was a shocking absence of good maps, and such relatively few written descriptions that we have of locations show that in any kind of detailed cartography, these people are out of their depth. The principal ancient references to the Isle of Cauda, for example, would place it at the wrong position, given what we now know about the geography of the Mediterranean. But Luke's account in the book of Acts of Paul's journey takes them under the lee of the isle at the appropriate time. So sometimes we can check up on these things that they could not have checked up on from sources themselves. There were not a lot of local libraries in the ancient world. There were a few big ones, but even the big ones mainly contained literary works, Roman literary works written in Latin, Greek literary works written in Greek. These were the primary things that stocked them. Maybe also a copy of Columela's treatise on how to plant trees. So an agriculture volume, maybe some really bad poetry written by Nero's pimp, Petronius. Not an atlas among them, nothing of that kind. So you can't just say, well, they went and they looked it up. The resources you have available to you were not available to them. And we have to beware of anachronism when we look at details and ask ourselves, how did they get these things right in such profusion of detail? So intimate knowledge of locations is evidence that the author either was an eyewitness or spoke to eyewitnesses. That's the primary claim that we're going to try to nail down. So let's just talk about two of these here. In John chapter 5, we read, there is in Jerusalem by the sheep gate a pool in Aramaic called Bethesda, which has 5 roofed colonnades, 5 walkways with roofs over them to shield you from the elements, both in the hot season and in the winter season. Now, that may seem like an innocent enough statement, just a little passing bit of geographical knowledge. Well, surely everybody knew kind of the layout of Jerusalem, or at any rate, that wasn't too hard to acquire. You would think, but what you need to remember is that between the mid-60s and the year 70, there was a war going on in all of Palestine between the Jews and the Romans. The Jews started a revolt, and it stretched out that long because the Romans never ruled by occupation. The forces that they had stationed in the eastern colonies of the empire, like Palestine, were not sufficient to put up with a large-scale local revolt. They ruled by threat, and the threat was that they would send in the legions. And the legions might take a while to arrive, but when they arrived, they would be utterly ruthless. This war dragged on through the late 60s to the year 70, when Jerusalem was completely sacked and destroyed. The Jewish historian Josephus tells us that the Romans left one wall standing. And apart from that, which was just left standing as a shelter for a small garrison that they left there, apart from that one wall, you could not tell that the place had ever been inhabited at all. It was that thorough a destruction. So the Jewish war and the ultimate destruction of Jerusalem cuts like a chasm across the first century. On the one side of it, you have people who lived to adulthood in a world that disappeared comprehensively after the destruction of Jerusalem. If you were writing after that time, but you had your own memories of Jerusalem, you would be able to make a statement like this. If you had access to someone else who had memories of Jerusalem, perhaps you could do that. But once that generation dies out, that knowledge is extremely hard to get. So this casual reference to a pool called Bethesda, which has 5 roofed colonnades, is something that came in for its share of criticism. One of the critics was a Frenchman named Loisy. So Alfred Loisy wrote, "The ancients who hoped to find in the source a Jewish symbol, and in the 5 porches an allusion to the 5 books of the law, undoubtedly discovered the thought of the evangelist." That's my translation from the French. What Loisy is saying is pentagonal pools, probably not. However, if it's a metaphor for the 5 books of the law, why then we have a spiritual meaning for it, right? This man had been lying under the law for all these years, and the law could do nothing for him, but look what Jesus does for him. So don't think this is literal. How silly you would have to be to think that. No, this is a metaphorical description, and the appearance of intimate knowledge of the geography of the area is an illusion that arises because you are not sophisticated enough to read the passage the way that he reads it. Well, some things age better than others, right? This one did not age well. In 1956, archaeological work began at the Pool of Bethesda and revealed that it's located near the Sheep Gate. Like John said, it's bounded by 4 roofed colonnades, and it was spanned across the middle by a 5th one. No further comment seems necessary there. How about another pool? Let's go with Pool of Siloam in John 9 is a pool where Jesus tells the man who was born blind to go and wash. And that pool was unearthed by accident in 2004 when a work crew was laying a new sewage line in southern Jerusalem. And suddenly they ran across what appeared to be extremely old steps. So they said, let's hold off a second here. Let's see what we've got. And as they gradually excavated more and more of it, they discovered that they had found a multi-level pool. You'll notice as you look at the picture that from the left, the steps come down and then there's a flat area and then the steps start going down again. Apparently the pool was filled to different depths at different times of year. And the flat areas provided a place where people who were waiting to get into the water could ritually purify themselves by immersing in the waters. This pool is not mentioned in the New Testament outside of the Gospel of John. John's the only mention of it. So there are many more aspects of location, and Lydia's got an entire chapter on that, but that's just sort of to whet your appetite for it. Let's move on to customs. Let's start with funeral processions. So Luke 7 tells the story of the raising from the dead of the son of the widow of Nain. So it's her only son. She was already herself a widow. Funeral procession comes out of the city as Jesus and his followers draw near to the gate. So it looks like the procession is coming out just before they could head in. That's the way that it reads most naturally. Jesus speaks to the mother, who is apparently among the mourners, first. Then he comes to the bier on which the man's body has been laid, and the miracle occurs. Well, in Judea, mourners don't walk in front of the bier, they walk behind it. And they were encouraged to reflect on the life of the person as they were walking along behind the pallet or the bier on which the body was being borne. So if things were done the way that they were done in Judea, this would be odd. Jesus would have encountered the body first and the mother afterward. Maybe not an impossible order of things, but awkward. However, we have a rabbinic source that tells us in Galilee, by contrast with Judea, the mourners would walk in front of the bier. Now I ask you, if you were making up a story about a dead man coming out of a city, would you know that about your location? Would you know specifically how to do that? No cheating. You can't Google it. How would you find this out? I go down to the library. Sorry, all your library has is some really bad Latin poetry. Now what? So it is not easy to get small details right. However, the force of an argument like this is not the force of just one thing. It's a cumulative force. By itself, this is a very small thing. If you were in grave doubt about the trustworthiness of the New Testament, this shouldn't shift you much, but it should shift you a little. One of the things that Julia Galef says in her book, The Scout Mindset, is that people who are good at changing their minds are able to change their minds incrementally. They think in terms of degrees of credibility rather than just in black and white, it's definitely true or it's absolutely certainly false. And if you were inclined to think that the Gospels are almost certainly late made up things, this one, well, what would it take you from? Maybe from 95% confidence down to 92%? Maybe a small shift. But you need to be ready to make those small adjustments. And sometimes you'll find yourself going down and then up and then down again as you encounter various kinds of evidence. They don't always point in the same direction. But don't ignore small pieces of evidence. Small pieces of evidence can mount into a very powerful case. Let's talk about the prejudice against Galileans, which is definitely visible in the New Testament, right? Oh, can any good thing come out of Nazareth? Somebody says in John chapter 1. Why? Well, Nazareth is in Galilee. It's kind of got a bad rap, right? Surely the Christ is not going to come from Galilee, is he? Say some of the people when they're discussing, well, who is this Jesus? Is he the Christ? Is he the Messiah? Is he the one? Well, I mean, but he's from Galilee. So like, how could that be? In Matthew 26, when Peter is trying to work his way into the house where Jesus has been dragged off by the soldiers, servant girl says to him, the way you talk gives you away. You're one of those Galileans, aren't you? Right? Something about the way they talked was funny. Now, I come from up north, and I say it with sorrow and to my shame. Our idea of how to portray someone as being ignorant is to give this person a really thick Southern accent, just the way it goes. I have encountered a cultured Southern accent from somebody who could draw blood with a simple sentence. I am well aware that Southerners can be as sharp as anyone on the planet, but the prejudice and the way that it's expressed is to make fun of a very, very thick, hick backwoods accent. That's just the way it is up north. So what's this about the way you talk, and what was thought about that from sources outside the New Testament? Well, let's go and let's push around in the Talmud. There was a certain person from the Galilee who would walk and say to people, who has Amar? Who has Amar? They said to him, foolish Galilean, what do you mean? Galileans do not pronounce the guttural letters properly. So it was unclear whether he sought a donkey, Hamar, to ride, or wine, Hamar, to drink, or wool, Amar, to wear, or a lamb, Imar, to slaughter. This is an example of the lack of precision in the Galileans' speech. Okay. There was a certain woman who wanted to say to her friend, my neighbor, come and I will feed you milk. However, due to the imprecise articulation of her words, she said to her neighbor, may a lioness eat you. All there in the Bavli. It's in the Babylonian Talmud. And by the way, if you want these slides, I don't expect that you're all like blessed with photographic memories, or maybe I should say cursed with them and memorizing all this. So all the slides I will give to Alan. Alan, please share with anybody who asks. So I want, this information wants to be free. We'll send it around. So if you want to go and look this up, I even made it a hyperlink so you can click on it and you can go and read it yourself. All right. So the picture of a prejudice against Galileans is borne out by rabbinic references to the funny way, the imprecise way that Galileans pronounce things. This is a prejudice that we can document from external Jewish sources. How would you know that if you were making it up? if you were writing a story about the eve of World War II in the south of France, what are the prejudices of the people there? Go, make it up.
They don't like people who aren't French.
They don't like people who aren't French. You could probably get away with that, or at least they don't like people who aren't French and try to speak French,
They
right?
don't like people from Paris.
They don't like, maybe they don't like people from Paris, but maybe some of them are people from Paris. I know, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of fun stuff to be said. P.G. Wodehouse actually was living in a villa in the south of France when the war broke out, and he got captured by the Nazis. Later in life, he said, people often ask me, young men starting out in life often ask me, how do you become a prisoner of war? Well, in my case, it was very simple. You buy a villa in the south of France and the Nazis do the rest. But it is difficult to get detailed information on the prejudices of people when you can't go and look it up and you haven't lived there. This is the ring of truth. By itself, not a knockdown thing, but again, what happens when you've got a bunch of little vectors and they're all pointing in the same direction? Math types out there, do we know what we get when we do that? What do we get? Vector addition. We get a big vector pointing in the same direction, right? Lots of little vectors become a big vector. That's what we're looking at here. Okay, a cumulative case, just like you can build a mountain out of grains of sand, a cumulative case may carry a great deal of weight, even though you could anatomize it into bits that by themselves look negligible. That's not a good criticism. Tithing spices. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you tithe mint and dill and cumin and have neglected the weightier matters of the law, justice and mercy and faithfulness. Tithing herbs, really? I mean, does anybody actually, am I supposed to count them or weigh them? This picture of dill weed from McCormick, that's 0.3 ounces of dill. Were you really going to put those in scales and weigh them out? And did they really go that far? Or is this just some fabulist writing a little bit of a fantasy story about some imaginary rabbi who might have done some marvelous things? Wow, good thing we've got those rabbis to set us straight, right? Here's the rabbis on spices. He who husks barley may husk each grain singly, and if you eat barley one grain at a time, you don't have to tithe. But if he husked and put them into his hand collectively before eating, he is liable to tithe. If coriander was sown for the sake of the seed, the plant is exempt from tithe, but if sown for the sake of the plant, the whole plant, then both the seed and the plant must be tithed. So you got to figure out how do I get 10% of the coriander crop? Rabbi Eliezer said, as for dill, tithe must be given from the seed and the plant and the pods. But the sages, however, say, so like on the one hand, on the other hand, both the seeds and the pod are tithed only in the case of pepperwort and eruca. I guess they really did like mess around trying to figure out how to tithe their tiny little bits of herb. Notice also the way that Jesus makes a play on words, which the Jews loved about this, right? You tithe mint, dill, and cumin and have neglected the weightier matters of the law. It's very typical Jewish humor. No, this has the ring of truth. This sounds like something that a rabbi at the time who was fed up with this finicking over the proper way to figure out which parts of the plant you have to tithe while you're ignoring things that matter a great deal more. Sounds like something he would say. Again, how do you look up the cultures of the time? If you don't know it, where do you go? If you're not living there, if you don't have access to someone who lived there at the time, how do you know what they did? Another category of evidence, and one that I love a great deal, I've spoken on to both of your groups at various times, is the category of undesigned coincidences. Undesigned coincidences are accidental interlockings of two texts that manifestly were not written in order to support one another, and yet the way they interlock points to truth. Often one text will raise a very natural question, like you're reading along and you hit a speed bump, and then another text will answer it, but in passing. The more casual, the less connected to it, the better. And so that's what we have here. Matthew 14 tells the story of the death of John the Baptist. At that time, Herod the Tetrarch, Herod Antipas, up in Galilee, heard about the fame of Jesus and had a sudden attack of conscience and said to his servants, this is John the Baptist. He's been raised from the dead. That's why these miraculous powers are at work in him. And then we go on and we get the story of how Herod Antipas had John imprisoned and then ultimately beheaded. The story is also told in other places, but Matthew has a phrase that's not found in any of the other Gospels, and that's the phrase, to his servants. Now, if you're reading along for devotional purposes only, maybe you're sort of drowsing and you're not thinking very hard about this. But if you're reading along and trying to make sense of every bit of it, then this bit might hit you. Who is Matthew? Is he the official chronicler of the life of Herod Antipas, Tetrarch of Galilee? No. He's a former tax collector. Now he's a traveling preacher. How does he know what Herod Antipas is saying, presumably in the privacy of his own palace, to his own servants? How does he have any idea about that? Read all around in the Gospel of Matthew, go back to previous chapters, forward to later ones, you will find no answer to this question, no answer at all. Now, that doesn't have to be devastating, right? There are sometimes historical claims that we can't check up and find out how the person got access to the information. That doesn't mean that they're false. But you know what Bill's going to say? Bill's going to say he's writing a novel. He made it up for a fact. It's just for the fun of it. So it would at least be more satisfying if we had something more to say than, no, I believe in my heart that it's an authentic historical record. Would be more satisfying. Well, it's a beautiful thing. We've got 4 Gospels. So if you go over to Luke chapter 8, not a discussion of the death of John the Baptist, Luke is listing people who contributed to the support of the ministry of Jesus and his disciples. And in verse 3, he lists Joanna. Here's what he says. Joanna, the wife of Chuza. Great, who's Chuza? Herod's household manager. This guy is Herod Antipas's steward. Jesus' followers had family in the highest ranks of Herod's servants. And now it is not a mystery how a tax collector turned traveling preacher might have found out what Herod was saying to his servants. I stress, again, in case this went by too quickly, this is not something that can be brushed away by saying, oh, haven't you perhaps heard of the synoptic problem? Even if Matthew, in some measure, is literarily dependent on Mark, this can't be part of that because Mark doesn't have the phrase to his servants. It's not there. It's in Matthew alone. And this touches on another important point, which is that when we think of the level of dependence one document has on another, we have to think of it as a matter of levels. It is not an all or nothing thing. The degree of familiarity somebody has with a document may be partial, incomplete. I'll try to press this point with another example here in just a moment. Let's look at Mark 6:31 and then again verse 39. So 31. And he, Jesus speaking, said to them, come away by yourselves to a desolate place and rest a while. For many were coming and going, and they had no leisure even to eat. Lots of crowds around. Nothing unrealistic about that. Then he commanded them all to sit down in groups on the green grass. Okay. Green grass. So this is a very dry and arid climate, and the grass is brown most of the year. The only time that it's green is during the growing season. But that growing season is a brief season in March to April, and then it dries out, and green is not the word that would come to mind for it. But John 6 also tells us the story of the feeding of the 5,000 and gives us an additional detail, as John frequently does. Now, the Passover, the Feast of the Jews, was at hand. This is right in the middle of the brief growing season. It's a great feast. Josephus said 3 million people a year traveled from around the Roman Empire to come to Jerusalem for the Passover every year. Let's suppose that he was exaggerating and we divide that by 10 and say, no, it was only 300,000 people a year. That's still a lot of people, which does dovetail with Mark's comment that there were many coming and going. Apparently, the many who were coming and going were not there to see Jesus. Otherwise, Jesus' suggestion, hey, let's get out of the crowd and go to some deserted place, would make no sense. Or if the crowd's there for you, it would be like Elvis saying, hey, guys, I need to get out of the crowd for a minute, so I'm just going to go over here. Everybody follows Elvis, right? No, you can't get away from a crowd that's there because you're there. So clearly they're there for some other reason. Mark doesn't bother to tell us what it is. When we intersect Mark with John, we can see what the explanation is. Do you see how the undesigned coincidences work? This is the way that interlocking can point towards truth. I have examples, if you want to ask me about these, of undesigned coincidences in secular history where people who are writing about things like Harold, the last of the Saxon kings, his brother Tostig, and the Battle of Hastings, call certain things undesigned coincidences. They, the historians themselves, use the phrase, so it's not just me promising you that this is an undesigned coincidence. They're making the claim in purely secular history and treating this as a kind of evidence that is worthy of being given weight. Okay, so you think you're catching on for this? Okay, now, but remember, there's this alternative. These guys just made up a bunch of stuff. Somebody along the line made up a bunch of stuff. So let's do it ourselves. Now, the only rule to this game is that if you have heard me do this one before, you are not eligible to play. All right, because some of you have. But for the rest of you, how many of you have read through the Gospels at least one time at some point in your lives? Like, we got a lot of Bible knowledge in the room. This sounds promising. Okay, so I would say if we wanted to invent a story, we want to forge it, it's going to be a miracle story, but we want to pass it off as an authentic account. We've got some stuff to work with here. We've got some knowledge of kind of, who the Jesus guy was, kinds of things he said, did. So we're going to do this. We're going to forge it, but we're going to do it cleverly so that people will say, oh, wow, great, another miracle of Jesus. At the beginning, you're going to set it up by having Jesus ask one of his disciples a question, right? So you may not remember all of the names of all of Jesus' disciples, but I bet you can remember some of them. Okay. The setup for the miracle story is going to have to do with money and food. Which disciple? You're making it up, so you got total freedom. Who would you pick? Peter. Why Peter? Because he's a rock star. He's everywhere in the Gospels. Who would know? I think we could probably get away with it.
With regards to money, maybe Matthew.
Maybe Matthew, because as a tax collector, he had, money passing through his hands. He was familiar with it. I bet we could make people believe it if we picked Matthew. Judas. We're told expressly he held the purse. Also that he was a thief, but he's the guy who's got the money back, right? So if we had Jesus turn to Judas and say this, I think we could probably put it across, and people would read right past that. They wouldn't say, whoa, that's weird. I think these people are making it up. So actually, this is not just a hypothetical example. Lifting up his eyes then and seeing the large crowd was coming toward him, Jesus said to Philip, where are we to buy bread so that these people may eat? Now, be it said with all due reverence, but for one of the disciples of Jesus Christ, Philip is as near to a non-entity as it's possible to be in the Gospels. In all of the Gospels, after the calling of the disciples, Jesus speaks to Philip only one other time. Why Philip? If you were making it up, why would you pick Philip? Well, let's read around a little bit and see if we can find out, okay? Luke also tells the story of the feeding of the 5,000. Here we go. And he took them and withdrew apart to a town called Bethsaida. When the crowds learned it, they followed him. You alertly notice that there is no mention of Philip here, right? But we do learn one thing that John didn't tell us. We learned that Bethsaida is the region where this whole event took place. Now go back to John, but not John 6. Jump 6 chapters forward to John 12:21. So there are some Greeks and they want to speak to Jesus. So these came to Philip, who was from Bethsaida in Galilee. Oh, wait a minute. I think we can connect the dots on this now, right? So Luke doesn't mention Philip. John doesn't mention Bethsaida as the setting. But when we put them together, and two passages, not just one from John, then we understand that Jesus is saying, so Philip, you're from around here. How late's the supermarket open? Think they got enough to feed 5,000 men plus the women and children milling around out there? What do you say, dude? And it makes sense. This does not look like either of the authors of the fourth gospel or of the third conspired to try to make their accounts fit together so that it would make sense why Jesus is speaking to Philip. It looks like one of them just casually drops a piece of information which you can coordinate with two different references in the other to make sense of the whole picture. This is the ring of truth. By itself, it is one more piece of evidence. But you see what I'm doing now? Am I making the point that as we layer pieces of evidence on pieces of evidence, the case becomes more weighty? Do you see how that works? Also, they're not all just from one category, right? We've already looked at locations, we've looked at customs, we're looking at undesigned coincidences. These are all coming from different regions of evidential space, but they're all pointing in the same direction. Let's build that vector a little bit more. There's a phenomenon of unnecessary details. And because I see that I'm kind of pushing the hour here and I don't want to go too far, I'm going to kind of do a rapid run through some of these. When ordinary people are recalling events from their own lives, frequently they include details that add nothing to the story. My wife ran across a video of the country singer Jimmy Fortune talking about how he got his first audition with the Oak Ridge Boys. And as he's telling the story, they called him up and he said, okay, and they sent a guy in a Lincoln Continental to pick him up, and the Lincoln Continental plays no other role in the story whatsoever. Like, why is it there? It's there because that's what he remembered. Big old car comes to get me. It just was salient to him. It's not a narrative device. It's not a metaphor. It has no deep spiritual meaning. And it's not even the hook for a song. It's just a car. But that's the way that people are as they're recalling these things. That's how they do it. And the more you think about people you've spoken to, asked to recall parts of their life, the clearer this will be to you. Well, do we find such marks of artlessness in the Gospels? Let's look. John 1:39. What time was it when this happened? It was the 10th hour. Oh, and what about the 10th hour? Well, nothing particularly. It just was the 10th hour. Well, at that wedding at Cana, there were 6 water pots containing 20 or 30 gallons each. Please do not tell me that you have some spiritual metaphorical meaning for 6, because I don't believe you, right? It's just, why would you remember that there were 6 water pots? Because there were 6 water pots. There's really no other good explanation for that. Why would you throw it in? It doesn't add to the story, really. Mark 4:38, Jesus is in the boat. He's sleeping on a pillow. He's not just asleep in the boat. He's asleep on a pillow in the boat. What about the pillow? Oh, it's the grace of God on which we all rest. No, it's just a pillow. It doesn't do anything else in the story. Nobody uses it as a life preserver the way that they tell you when you're going through the little thing at the beginning of your airline ride. It's just a pillow. That's all it is. What's the detail doing there? It's how the person telling the story remembered it. Since it's in Mark's gospel, probably was Peter remembering. Probably Peter owned the boat. He remembers there was this pillow there and the rabbi was asleep on a pillow, of all things, in the middle of a storm. Rabbi, we're going to die. Oh. No faith again, guys. Right. And here we go. And there are many, many, many more of these. And again, there's an entire chapter on unnecessary details in the book. So if you're interested, there's plenty more out there. How about unexplained allusions, just references to things in passing that maybe we don't understand, we don't know what they meant, and maybe the original audience might not even have understood, but they're just thrown in there in the course of the running of the story. So John 2:12, Jesus went down to Capernaum and stayed a few days. Right? We can see it. It's on his itinerary. We've got the ticket stub from it. Okay, why? We don't know. What further role does his trip or his location at Capernaum play in the narrative? None. Well, then, why is it there? Tell us why you included it. There is like, it's just like, and he did this, and then there's nothing. There's nothing further. But this is the way that ordinary people tell stories. This is not something that's out of the ordinary range of experience. A phrase that my wife likes to use, and she uses it in the book, is activate your real world imagination. Instead of coming to this with some preconception that you have to hear a highly crafted literary thing, just ask yourself, what would normal people be like if they were telling things from their own experience? And you will find that time and again, they just say these things. I just spent a few lovely hours with some friends in my hometown. One of them is an immigrant from Latvia. The other is an immigrant from Bavaria. They have been married for 46 years, and Gunnar is 92. And, as they told their stories and their memories, they made references to things that I didn't understand the references to, but that was just part of the passing way that the story was going through their heads. This is how real people talk. John.
Sorry, Tim. There was just too much truth, too much conviction.
Overwhelmed.
We'll lay hands on Bill later.
All right.
What we'll do with him once we lay hands on him, I'm not sure, but we will lay hands on him. So remember that they said to Philip, so they came to Philip, who was from Bethsaida in Galilee. Well, back up and get the previous verse. Some Greeks want to speak to Jesus. So they come to Philip and they say, sir, we would see Jesus. What did the Greeks want? You never do learn. That was just the occasion on which Jesus, in the course of a conversation, most of which we just don't have, said something that was memorable, but John remembered that it was tripped off by some Greeks coming to Philip and saying, okay, could we talk to Jesus? So he gets into the story. This is the way that artless telling of memories works. In John 3:25, a dispute arises about purification. Okay, what's the dispute? Sorry, all you get is that John the Baptist says of Jesus, he must increase and I must decrease. We could guess, we could conjecture, but it would just be that. It would just be guessing. It's an unexplained illusion. Now, I know what you're thinking, and you're right. The thing, a really accomplished liar or fiction writer could add unnecessary details and unexplained allusions to make it look like the truth. Like clever fabulist making this thing up. Now let's think about that. Let's think about what that means. First of all, why would a clever liar add unnecessary details and unexplained allusions? Because it makes it look more realistic, right? Which means it really is the sort of thing we would expect if it were a truthful account, and it's just that the really clever liar is actually cottoning on to that and picking up on it. That's why it's clever. Second, honestly, most liars prefer a different strategy. And so there's a wonderful book by FBI agent, I believe, like ex-FBI agent, called How to Spot a Liar. And he says most people, when they're lying, actually try to go vague. They're like, oh, I can't remember. I don't remember where I saw him. I saw him, but I don't remember any. What was he wearing? I don't remember anything. Like, just that they try to keep their stories as vague as possible. And there's a reason for that. If you know you're lying and you fear you might get caught lying, then being vague provides fewer handles for somebody to grab at and catch you. So in point of fact, although a clever liar could try, he'd be doing it only because that would actually give it verisimilitude, would make it seem truth-like. And most liars, knowing that they are unlikely to be able to get away with that, actually go the other direction. Oh, one more, Acts chapter 18. So this also spills over into the book of Acts, which is Luke part 2, in case you didn't know. Paul, we are told, had his hair cut at Cenchrea, for he was keeping a vow. What vow? You never find out. It's like stops and gets a haircut at Sancrea. And we have no idea. That's it. I mean, that's literally the last that we hear about Paul's haircut. Well, was it a mullet? What kind of haircut? We don't know. We are not told. So, but these are the kinds of things that you will find in historical narratives written by people who are artlessly telling things the way they remembered it. Do these features prove that everything they say is infallibly true? No. Do they, however, lessen the probability that these are deliberate forgeries or just accounts by people who have been duped into thinking things that actually never happened? Yeah, it does tend to lessen the credibility of those significantly in aggregate. Beware anachronism. We have hyper-realistic fiction now that does all these things, but that is a genre that had not been invented and would not be invented until Daniel Defoe sat down to write Robinson Crusoe. That is actually the first modern novel by many reckonings, and it's the one where the author tries to add all kinds of details to give his account verisimilitude like that. If you read the Caliroe, you will find, which is an ancient and rather humorous piece of fiction, you will find that none of this is like the Gospels. C.S. Lewis once said, I've been reading fictions and legends and romances all my life, and I know that not one of them is like this, like the Gospels. Of this kind of writing, there are only two possible explanations. Either it's reportage, pretty close up to the facts, nearly as close as Boswell was to Johnson, containing no doubt some errors, but very, very close up to the facts, or some unknown person or persons in the first century without known predecessors, without any successors, invented the entire technique of modern detailed, realistic, novelistic fiction. It's one or the other. Anyone who does not see this simply has not learned to read, says Lewis. A lot of what I'm doing here can be seen as a gloss on what Lewis is saying. Lewis is saying it from the standpoint of the sheer literary structure of the things. I'm trying to substantiate it with other lines of evidence pointing in the same direction. This was Lewis's field of expertise. He actually wrote the Oxford Handbook of English Literature on a chunk of these writings, which he refers to rather despondently in his correspondence as, oh hell, for what he was writing. So the Gospels don't present themselves as fiction. If these details are added to appear realistic, then the authors are hoaxing. That's the alternative. You're going to have to go with that as an explanation if you're going to say, no, they deliberately salted these things through there to throw off their readers. I have a whole section on the person of Jesus and what a low resolution, a high resolution Jesus looks like. However, instead of pushing forward into that, I want to stop now. I want to take questions. So I've got material there. If Bill tries to poleaxe me with it, I'm warning you, Bill, I'm going to dump the truck. And so we have it, it's all there, but let me just pause here and throw it open for questions. So if you've got questions, maybe there's some questions on the live stream or somebody in here, then just go for it.
If we could start, let Bill have the first question.
Bill,
and
take it away,
maybe if Alan has a question, and then we'll throw it open both to the online people and also to the people that are here live with us.
Well, I had a debate yesterday, and one of the people in the audience said, why do you take so much time as an atheist reading the Bible and studying this stuff? And I said, this is the reason. Because when you're dealing with people like Tim, you better have your stuff together because he's going to blow you out of the water. But here's my deal, okay? William Lane Craig has said that Genesis is mytho-history. He believes that 750,000 years ago, Homo hypergensis went and evolved, and he was the first Adam 700,000 years ago, and he evolved into Homo sapiens, Denisovans, and Neanderthals. So we know that Genesis is myth. Why can't you accept the fact that the Gospels are full of myth? Even though they do have, I agree, they do have historical accounts and historical actions, absolutely.
Okay, so is that really your argument?
Yeah, oh yes, absolutely. Well, it's don't listen to
Right.
me, listen to William Lane Craig. He's the one that says it's mytho-history.
I love Bill, but I think he's out to lunch.
Okay.
I don't think that on this point, he's got a solid argument to back him up. He's found one person who specializes in folklore, and he's extrapolated an awful lot from that. And I do not think that the case that he builds there is convincing. But even if it were, he has nothing like the level of cross-corroborated details that we've got. The evidence of the undesigned coincidences, the specific detailed locations that were destroyed in the Jewish war, but recounted in ways we can archaeologically test. He has none of that for the Genesis creation story, none of the details that make a case here. So the case exists. It deserves to be considered on its own merits, regardless of what someone else thinks about some other piece of writing that happens to have been bound together into the same set of covers and called the Bible, which is actually just a mistake. Someone misunderstood Latin cognates. It actually means the books, not the book. But we are dealing here with 4 documents that are much more recent and that we can cross-check. We can check up on how well the authors do with these kinds of details, and what we discover matters. So the case stands independent of what you think of Genesis. I am not persuaded by what Bill has to say there. Love Bill. I think he's a great guy. I think he's a brilliant guy. I just think this is not his best work. But regardless, what we have here is a case that stands on its own.
No, I'm with you. Right now, there's this controversy going on that's going to the very foundations of Christianity. And Joshua Swamidass believes Adam's reasoned 6,000 years ago. Hugh Ross reasons to believe 125,000 years ago. Did he evolve? Did Adam have interbreed with the people outside the garden, the Neanderthals? It's a total mess. But let's talk about the New Testament. Obviously, we had the great Dale Allison, one of the top 5 scholars in the world. So I asked him, Dale, what about the birth narratives? I don't see a lot of history in that. And we all know that the birth narratives, Luke has a census that never really happened. Matthew has the slaughter of an innocents, and they go down to Egypt. They cannot be reconciled. So obviously the birth narratives are fiction. Then you have the miracles. We can write them off. In the trial, I mean, that's full of fictional things. And we asked Dale the post-resurrection appearances of Jesus, the road to Emmaus, the Sea of Galilee, the fish fry there. Are those historical? He said, nah, I don't see a lot of history there. So my question to you, Tim, is here's a guy that's a Christian, a deacon, and he says Jesus was wrong in his book, Resurrecting Jesus. So you can be a Christian, you can have faith, but believe in the mythological elements in the Gospels. What do you think of that?
All right, let's start from the top. I am not persuaded by his church affiliation that Dale Allison is a Christian. To be a Christian, you need to do more than have a moral vision and to think that Jesus is in some sense responsible for that. You have to believe certain things. St. Paul is very clear on this, right? When somebody says to him, well, what must I do to be saved? He's like, okay, right? You're going to confess with your mouth Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, which Dale does not. He believes the tomb sort of somehow got emptied out,
Right.
But maybe like
grave robbers or whatever.
Right. And, I'm sorry, I don't see his actually believing the core things that you need to believe.
Really? You don't say so?
And so, but I admire the audacity with which you put it out there. Well, since he's obviously a Christian, right? This is why we love you, Bill, because you always put it forcefully like that. As far as what Dale Allison accepts or doesn't accept, no, I don't think the birth narratives are irreconcilable at all. In fact, I've written 3 blog posts on them, which I would love to send you the links to, and then you can rave about them, right? In one sense or another of rave. But we're just at loggerheads on this. Why not believe in the slaughter of the innocents? Is it because there's not another thing that documents the death of a dozen infant boys in Bethlehem? There was a lot of death surrounding Herod. How about his locking together all of the chief people in his entire domain into the hippodrome when he was on his deathbed, and then extracting promises, put archers around the rim and kill them all, because otherwise nobody will be mourning at my death, but this way there will be a great mourning. This is the kind of guy he was. Mm-hmm. It's not really a stretch to say, thinking that someone was going to be born a king, he wanted to just get rid of that. That would be entirely in character. Moreover, there are even external historical corroborations of the story in Matthew chapter 2. So you may remember that in Matthew 2, verse 22, after Joseph hears that the one who saw the child's life is dead. He hears that Archelaus is reigning in his father's place, and he's disturbed. And so he turns aside and he goes up into Galilee rather than just back to Bethlehem in the region of Judea. Well, why? What's the news? Archelaus was his oldest son. Wouldn't he be likely to take over for daddy? Why is this bad news? Why does it change his plans? And the answer to that you can't find in the New Testament. But if you read Josephus, you discover that Archelaus had slaughtered thousands of Jewish pilgrims in the temple at Passover just after taking over his father's position. And Passover was canceled. So here's Joseph, and he's heading on the road from Egypt. He's heading back up into Judea. And who does he meet on the road? Thousands upon thousands of Passover pilgrims fleeing, saying, Archelaus has shed blood in the temple. There is no Passover this year. He's not a low-watt bulb. He knows what to do. Now, there's this external historical corroboration for this thing about the flight into Egypt. I don't find that implausible at all. There are other lines of argument I could also use for that. So I think that what you've given us is a good illustration of a tendency to try to egg it up, right? Try to fluff up anything that is problematic and make it sound just as solid and secure as you can make it sound.
No.
But it's not that easy, Bill. You actually have to make arguments, not just assertions. You have to argue for these things. I've read Allison's work. I am unpersuaded by the arguments he makes. In fact, I have very specific worries about his ability to read well and understand things because he has misread me in something that he comments about in this book. And so I am personally in a position to say, I know of at least one thing that he has misunderstood. So, however, let's be fair. Dale Allison writes like an angel.
Oh,
He is a
brilliant.
phenomenal writer, and he is tremendously widely read. He's read just an enormous amount. And I respect those things. I do not, however, feel thereby compelled to abandon a position for which there is solid evidence and to go with him instead.
I know. I mean, I agree with you, but don't you think the best way to understand Jesus is as a failed apocalyptic prophet who just had a bad weekend in Jerusalem? I mean, isn't that the best way to understand?
Can I have that bingo card? We were wondering which things you were going to say. We were creating Bill Cluck bingo.
The over-under
That
was
was on
10
the bingo
minutes
card.
in.
It was, really, honestly.
That's Brady, though.
Yeah, no, I don't.
Zombies.
Yes.
That's what-
Yeah.
what-
Or
But no,
some-
you said don't use zombies last year. And I was like, zombies.
Right, double donkey. That was on there too, right? So yeah, no, we've already seen your bingo card. We know that that's on it. No, I disagree. And I would actually commend to you a work on the beginnings of Christianity by George Park Fisher, which has an entire section on the question of the delay of the parousia. And it's just a thoughtful historian's take on it that I found good reading. He's not overcalling it. He acknowledges that some of the early Christians probably did believe that the return of Jesus was right around the corner. In fact, Paul's got to tell some of the people in Thessalonica, get back down off your rooftops and get your butts moving and do something useful, right? So yeah, sure, some people do. I think that is ascribable to the teaching of Jesus in some clear-cut way. There's some hard passages in there, but on the whole, I am not persuaded that it is.
Okay, one more question. We had a lawyer on, a really sharp lawyer who's won millions of dollars. Mark Lanier was his name. And we asked him, Paul says 500 witness to Jesus, which sounds good. And some of whom are alive today, which seems kind of off the cuff, seems credible. The problem is, and I told this guy, wouldn't you like, as a lawyer, to depose these people, to get them to say, when did you see Jesus? Where did you see Jesus? What was his word? Do you see what I'm saying? Why are we supposed to believe something that just Paul says that we don't have good evidence for?
Okay, so who is Paul writing to there? He's writing to the church at Corinth. Why is he writing to the church at Corinth? Well, one of the reasons is that his own authority as an apostle has been called into question by some people there in the Corinthian church. It's a touchy situation. He's got people who are not on Team Paul in the group that he's writing to.
Well,
if he makes a blatant mistake on a matter like that, he's risking being called out. Would we like Bill, we would like to have all kinds of things.
Yeah.
I'd like to have $1 million in a Swiss bank account, right? If only God would give me some clear sign, right? But it is a bad reason to discard the evidence that we do have to say, but I can imagine a way it could be even better.
Mhm.
That is not a compelling line of argument. We can always imagine ways that the evidence could be better. I can imagine ways that my evidence or the existence of Abraham Lincoln could be better, but the evidence that I have is perfectly adequate. When it's adequate, it's a mistake to turn around and say, but wouldn't you like to have that? Well, sure, right? Yeah, I'd like to have all kinds of stuff. But if we allowed a defense attorney to get away with that in a court of law, we'd never convict anybody. Yeah, well, you got all this evidence, but don't you wish that you had the print of his left little toe also? Okay. Yeah, that would be further evidence. I agree. I grant, but we don't have it. But it doesn't matter because we've got the evidence we do. And if it is sufficient, and that's the really critical question, is it sufficient? If it's not sufficient, then let's talk about that. Let's say that. But if it is sufficient, then just to say, but I wish I could have something else, is really to distract attention from the evidence that's there already. So is it time for the laying on of hands yet?
Yeah.
I'm going to ask Alan now to just make a comment or two, and then I saw somebody's hand sort of
Yeah, we
floating in
wanna-
the air. I think we got several. Alan,
I do want to say one thing quickly. Being a reasonable faith club, we do have some affiliation with William Lane Craig.
No, really.
So just a quick clarification. And to be honest, I also don't think that particular work about Adam was his best work. But when he says mytho-history, he is not saying that it's false. He's saying more that it's in the category of metaphor and so forth.
Yeah, Genesis 1 through 11.
Yeah,
but
so
way that
it's not
medieval
rejecting-
history. It's not real.
Yeah, so he's taking maybe a little bit more of the
sort of split the
non-literal-
difference, metaphoric readings of certain parts of it.
yeah.
Well, you know, some people sometimes ask me, well, do you take the Bible literally? And I like to say the literal parts I do.
Yeah.
Sure, right? But that's, yes, not everything is literal. I do, however, disagree on the places that he's drawing the line. But that's that, you know,
Sure, yeah,
you brought it
those
up. That's the place where I do part company with him on that, as on some other things. But again, he's a brilliant guy. He can speak for himself. You know, he doesn't need me to defend him. So, all right.
Let's open it up to
Well,
Ashton.
do this if I could first. real
Yeah.
quick. I do have one from our Zoom audience.
Go,
And those
yeah.
that are listening by Zoom, if you'll text in
Sure.
your questions, I'll
Sure.
read those for you. This is coming from Peter Weishart, and it's a question, and it fits what we're talking about Dale Allison and Bart Ehrman. And before I read, both of those men have been guest
Yeah.
authors at our book club, did a fantastic job,
Sure.
very articulate.
Yeah.
They made their cases. And so he said, I asked this, Peter says, I asked this to Dale Allison and Bart Ehrman. One more note. I appreciate that you said, Dale.
Oh, by the way, Dale Allison is our patron saint at the
Yeah.
atheists love him. He's going to all the atheists.
All the icons,
Yeah.
right? Yes.
You said he was the number 5 scholar in the world.
One of the top five?
I'm not going to question your rating system on scholarship. So how did you get him the number 5 scholar in the world?
It was on the back of his book.
Oh, okay.
He's saying that bias.
Evaluate your power rankings. But here's the question.
Level up, man. Okay.
I asked this to Dale Allison and Bart Ehrman, are there any documents, texts, or data points that say anything like we do not know who authored the text titled Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John? He's talking about anonymous authors of the gospel. Or give authorship to someone else besides Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Both of them said that we had no document giving authorship to a different writer. He says, is not history rooted in recourses? Is this an argument from silence? And he said he thinks that in the book, your wife calls this something else. But could you please address this great anonymous myth, or am I missing something?
Okay. So there's been a claim that has circulated. It really began to pick up steam with Brett Schneider's Probabilia, in which he questioned the traditional authorship of the fourth gospel. And then through the 19th century, it gathered steam. But in the ancient world, we know that there was someone, but we don't even know the person's name, who was some kind of Gnostic who suggested that maybe the fourth gospel was written by Cerinthus. He's mentioned only to be dismissed in church history. He's not even named. When you are looking for anybody else who questions even the traditional authorship of the Gospels, you've got to go all the way out to Faustus the Manichaean in the late 300s. He suggests that there's a problem with ascribing the first Gospel to Matthew because the author speaks of the conversion of Matthew in the third person, not in the first person. He doesn't say, I arose and I followed him. He says he arose and he followed him. St. Augustine, coming along in dispute with Faustus, absolutely buried that one. And yet Bart Ehrman has still lifted that one out and floated it a little bit. But to answer the question more directly, no, there is not one scrap of evidence that there was an alternative tradition for the authorship of any of these books. The problem is simply that we have not a great deal of evidence from the first century. Bookends put about 1 foot apart would enclose everything that we have from the era when the New Testament was coming together. And that includes Columella on planting trees. That includes Petronius' satires. It's just not that much literature that has survived. So to make an argument from silence, from the fact that we don't have more and more explicit namings of these things, that we have to wait until Irenaeus to get the actual names pinned on them there in the 2nd century, is, I think, to really rest on a weak read. I don't think that that's a solid way of reasoning at all. I would commend to you a little book by Samuel Prideaux Tregelles, a lecture on the historic origins of the New Testament books, which I would be happy to share. Again, I can give you a copy, and then you can share it. It's in public domain. Just the first 74 pages of Tregelles' book make an excellent historical case for the traditional authorship and to take into account the things that people have tried to say against it. There's much more to be said, but I hope that's a direct enough answer to the question.
Question on the guard story in Matthew. Is it possible to make a positive case based on the guard story in Matthew, or is it just a blight on the authenticity of the Gospels? What are your thoughts?
So tell me which bit of the guard story you're talking about.
Just the legendary element of the angel coming down from the sky, the fact that the only eyewitnesses are the guards who were there, assuming there were guards to begin with, the fact that it's not attested to in the other Gospels. It just seems kind of messy. So
I don't know, history is messy sometimes. That by itself, let me put it this way. Let's acknowledge up front that not every story that is told in the documents has an equal amount of corroboration. Right? Some have more, some have less. This one's down there on the less side. All right. But now let's ask this question. Suppose, for the sake of the argument, just thought experiment time, right? That in fact, Jesus of Nazareth did rise from the dead. Would it be altogether shocking if there were some other weird things going on at about the same time? Not so much, right? I mean, much more shocking if we say, yeah, nothing happened, the body just moldered away, they were somewhere else, I'm not sure. All right, well then, right, the guard story's got to stand on its own. But the resurrection is not only the hinge of Christian faith, it is also the point where if we actually have the evidence, and that's the great question, do we have it? But if we actually have the evidence to say, look, this is credibly attested, it looks like this actually happened, then that changes the evidential status of a number of other things, because it becomes more credible that some of them happened as well. So what I would say is, by itself and directly, it is not very well evidenced. And if all I had were just this little snippet that said, oh, there was this story, and there were no Christianity, none of the other bits about the resurrection, the life of Jesus, just that one little bit, I would say, oh, well, all right, there's another thing that I wouldn't give a great deal of credit to. But that's not the situation we're in. We're in a situation where there is actually quite a lot of other evidence, some pieces of which I've been trying to lay out for you here. So I would say I don't deny that some parts are less well attested than others, but I would want to stress that that doesn't have to stand or fall all by itself. We can't just atomize the text, take it one pericope at a time, and then pretend like we learned nothing when we find that some of them do stand up to investigation. When a friend has proven trustworthy and truthful on other occasions, we are inclined to give this friend more trust in cases where we haven't been able to check it up. Same thing with an author.
But Tim, here's,
On the future questions, if you could repeat, because they're not picking up cards.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
Was there enough of that in
I
context?
think there is.
Okay. All right.
here's the problem, Tim. It's not just the earthquake, the Roman guard that's not in the other synoptics, okay?
Did you tell him not to say zombies?
I'm not saying that. In Matthew, the tomb is opened in front of the women. In Mark, that when they get there, the tomb is closed. So this isn't a tangential thing. This is a direct contradiction, and this is the resurrection of Jesus.
This is not true.
Oh, okay. Well, that's
No, if you look at the Greek, you can read it either as an angel came down or an angel had come down.
Okay.
And so you can't.
Don't pull the Greek card on me.
Dude, my father
That's
was
the
a
trouble.
professor of Greek. I learned the Greek alphabet to the tune of 10 Little Indians. Alpha, theta, gamma, delta, epsilon, and zeta, eta. See, we're gonna hurt you though. It's gonna happen. All right.
One of the most, common objections is, and which, Bill over there brought up, is the census of Quirinius.
Glad you asked.
Do you want me to go into it?
Yes, please.
All right. Ask and you shall receive. So hang on a second here.
I almost asked that myself since Bill brought it up.
Well, Quirinius had a census in 6 AD. Jesus, according to Matthew, dies in 4 BC, because Herod died in 4 BC. And he says, go back to your ancestors 1,000 years ago. So it makes no sense that Joseph and Mary would go to their David's birthplace 1,000 years ago in Bethlehem.
Okay, so I am looking for there we go.
Good, we have the restated question.
User.
I just wanted to make it clear to everybody.
It's all good.
I made it clear like 6 years ago to you, but it's okay.
That was legendary embellishment. Don't go there, Brian.
Okay. So 2 objections against Luke. First objection, according to Luke, Caesar Augustus ordered a taxation of the whole Roman Empire during the reign of Herod the Great, but so runs the objection, Augustus never did this, and he could not have ordered a census just in Herod's domain, as seems to be said in Luke 2:1. Second objection, Luke confuses this supposed census with the one under Quirinius that took place about 12 years later. Is that second one the one that is really getting you? Is that where you want to go, or do you want to?
I do want to know what the answer to this question is.
Okay, so you know what? I do have something on number 1 here, but I'm going to skip over to objection number 2 because that's kind of the one that I think you were trying to raise, right? That
And
Luke
certainly Bill
confuses.
mentioned it in terms of the 12-year.
Okay, so objection 2. This registration, was the first registration when Quirinius was governor of Syria, but Quirinius didn't become governor of Syria until about the year 6, 10 years after Herod the Great was dead. So how can a chronological blunder of 10 to 12 years be explained? Now, before we answer the objection directly, we should note that Luke knows that Jesus was born during the reign of Herod the Great because he says so in Luke 1, verse 5. So whatever else is going on, this isn't a confusion about whether Jesus was born in the reign of Herod the Great. Luke also knows about the taxation under Quirinius because he reports Gamaliel's discussion of that in Acts chapter 5. So he's not unaware of that either. Whatever solution we come up with here, it's got to take those fixed points into account that Luke is apparently completely fine with that. And unless we think he just fell into amnesia and forgot that he had known these things, then these are facts that we have to take into account. So that's what we've got to do as we're trying to figure out what Luke's language says there. Now, there are 2 possible answers. One of them is that you can take the Greek to mean that there were 2 taxations, and this one came before the one under Quirinius. The second is that the Greek doesn't actually claim that the taxation under Quirinius took place in 6 BC. I favor the latter, but I know some people who favor the former, so let's talk about them both. We could take prote first as a term of comparison, and there's an analogy to this in the Gospel of John. Okay, he is before me, protos, mu'ain. So we would then read it. This census took place before Quirinius was governor of Syria. It's a neat solution, but pressing on prote as a term of comparison like that is not the normal way the Greek would be used. You can find a few places where it's used. They're not in Luke or in Acts. And so I think it's a little bit of a hard sell to say that that's what Luke is doing here. Nevertheless, when I talked to Ben Ritterington and I asked him, well, what do you think is going on there? He said, before. So that for him, that just was the simplest, cleanest explanation that he could think of. I have a somewhat more complicated one, but I think it doesn't suffer from foisting upon Luke a non-standard use of the Greek term. So here's my explanation. So first of all, you've got to realize the Gospels were written in capital letters, and in the uncial manuscripts, the capital manuscripts, the diacritical marks aren't there. So we have the word aute and the word haute. They would be just identical if written in all caps and without the breathing mark there. So as Eberhard and Godet and others have argued, the apographe itself, the aute, would be an intensifier, right? Not this signing up, this enrollment, but the enrollment itself. And what would the intensifier mean there? Well, it can mean either a registration, a signing up, or a taxation that follows a registration or involves a registration. So one admissible reading of Luke's Greek is that Quirinius, a decade later, picked up where the matter was dropped in 6 BC and brought the taxation itself to pass. A thing that I think is very important is that Luke uses the same verb that he uses in the beginning of chapter 2 over in Acts chapter 11, when he says that a certain famine that was prophesied came to pass in the reign of Claudius. So it's actually a usage that fits together with Luke's own usage in another place in the New Testament. And so it's got that going for it, which the prote reading does not. So what are the consequences of these readings? Luke's passing mention of the apographe in the time of Judas the Galilean doesn't have to be explained away. Luke's brief reference to the registration corresponds to something that we find in Josephus. Josephus does not say that there was a registration, but he does mention in Antiquity 17, so Josephus, non-Christian Jewish source, mentions that at this time there was an oath of allegiance to Caesar, and that would have been part of a registration for a taxation. But that there were some priests who refused to take this oath, and that they were fined for it, and a certain woman paid their fine from her own funds and was considered to be doing a righteous act by paying them for their refusal to take an oath of allegiance to Caesar. So all the apparent chronological discrepancies disappear on either of these. So summary of the responses: Luke intends to convey either, solution number one, that the census was before the one under Quirinius, or else, number two, that although the census was aborted in 6 BC, it was picked up and carried through to its logical completion, the taxation itself under Quirinius. That's the solution that I favor on this, and it respects those two data points: that he knows Jesus was born during the reign of Herod the Great, and that he knows about the taxation under Quirinius.
So basically, your solution to the problem is that Quirinius finished unfinished business that was started.
Yeah, I think that's a fair way of putting it. And you need to realize there were provinces of the Roman Empire where carrying out one taxation from enrollment to actually having the taxes packed away and sent to Rome took 40 years. So if you think 12 years is a long time to drop it, pick it back up, and bring it to completion, you should look at some of the other provinces. I mean, they were bad, and they were also bad at it. They were bad at being bad, like a Keystone Cops kind of thing.
Just a quick follow-up related to this. So do we only have one source that would say, well, I guess we have Luke himself saying Quirinius in 6 AD actually did the taxation.
On this reading, that's what it would be saying.
Okay.
And we've got Luke already, as he's quoting Gamaliel, saying that there was a census under Quirinius. So we have that. And we've got in Josephus a record of what happened later. I'll add one more thing. And this is an incidental thing, but I don't think that it's entirely worth neglecting. So Herod dies, as Bill said, in about 4 BC, Herod the Great, Herod the baby killer. Archelaus comes onto the throne at that time, however, because he follows right in his father's footsteps, steps into position before going to Caesar to ask permission. And when he does get around to going to Rome to ask Caesar for permission, and Caesar says, let's let you do it as a trial run. And he's terrible. He mismanages it and he gets kicked out. And that's when Quirinius becomes the governor and takes over. Now, at this time, Jesus was maybe 1.5, right? Because Herod goes to kill all the boys under the age of 2. So when Quirinius takes over and Archelaus, who shed blood in the temple, is gone, how old is Jesus? 11 or 12 by that time, right? He's maybe 1.5 at the time Herod the Great dies, and then he's 10 years older than that, so maybe 11 or 12. All right. According to Luke, how old is Jesus when his parents take him to Jerusalem to the temple for the first time?
12.
He's 12. It looks like they didn't take him back down to Jerusalem until both of the members of that family who had shed blood were gone. If you were Mary, do you think that might be something you would have been lobbying for? Let's just not take our son down there. They were trying to kill him down there. Now the son of the man who was trying to kill him is on the throne down there, and we know he has no compunction about shedding blood. They go down there after he's out. It's a small thing. It's a numerical coincidence, but I think it's something that's just worth adding to the mix and contemplating. All right.
That's a great response. I repent, dust and ashes. Hey, I gotta go. Anyway, look forward to seeing you in New Orleans. Thanks, man. We love it.
I hope you could be there.
Yeah.
All right.
Tim, I don't have a question, just maybe a simpler way to address what he's asking. I watched some time ago a lecture by Dr. Ehrman. He wrote a dissertation on this and presented it to his mentor, Bruce Metzger. He was very excited about this paper. He spent some time. It was 300 and some odd pages. I might be off. It's been a while since I saw the video. He was very excited to get Dr. Bruce's take on this. Comes back to visit with him on it, and he simply said, do you think Luke might have just wrote the wrong name down?
And so that is a third
Very
possible solution. And the way that it would run is that there was at that time a ruler, sort of a quasi-governor named Quintilius, right? So if we're having trouble remembering Q names, Quirinius, Quintilius, and one solution that has been put forward is that maybe the name was just mistaken and they put down a name that was a little bit more in mind at that time rather than that one.
So Luke was a Galilean then.
So yeah, couldn't pronounce it right. I don't think Luke was a Galilean, but hey, you never know. All right.
I've heard people, I think Bill mentioned it, question like the method of the census as well. Like it seems weird that they had to go to Bethlehem, like his home city.
Right. So the point is actually clarified, I think, some by looking at other Roman censuses. There's one in Egypt where people are told, we actually have the document telling them what to do, and they all have to go back to their administrative district. And the administrative district is where the records would be kept. So you go back to your administrative district, well, then that's how they can tell whether you belong here, whether you're that person who belongs to this family. So for Joseph, apparently, that was going back to the city of David because that was where his lineage was from. As far as Bill's claim about trying to be able to trace their lineage, Josephus traces his lineage back to one of the Aaronic priestly lines established in the Old Testament, and he does it name by name by name. This isn't against Appian, and he is very proud of the fact that he knows exactly what his genealogy is, running all the way back. I mean, the Mormons got nothing on Josephus. He's got it down. This man knows what it was. And so it appears that at that time, the Jews did in fact keep meticulous genealogical records, because in certain cases, like who can marry whom, it matters to them for their own reasons. And so they keep very, very close tabs on it. It is not something I do now, but we have to be aware of anachronism in both directions. One of the directions we have to be aware of it is not realizing that other people can be just as obsessed about genealogy as we are about other things. And they may very well have had those records. However, the central clearinghouse for those records would have been Jerusalem. And by the year 70, it was gone, burned in fire, and completely lost. There was a tremendous amount that we know was documented in the ancient world that's gone. The Roman Senate kept weekly records published of everything they did, the Acta Senatus. We don't have any of them. They're all gone. All across the Roman Empire, you're like, we don't have any of them at all. Yep, sorry, they've all disappeared into the sands. If we ever turn up even one of them from some relatively inconsequential point in time, it'll be big archaeological news. But there's just a tremendous amount that was written down that got lost. Time is not kind to papyrus or even to vellum. And so that's just the way that goes. So that was the other part of Bill's critique. And thank you for bringing that back up. But it does not seem to me, in light both of what we know about how Rome carried out censuses in Egypt and in light of what Josephus says about his knowledge of his own genealogy, that there's really anything as improbable as Bill makes it sound. Bill is not one to miss an opportunity to state things emphatically. And I love that about it. Right? I mean, have the strength of your convictions. Go ahead and say, if you think something, say it boldly. Did you notice, though, how often he would say that? And then I'd say something and say, okay, I agree with you. Did you see that happen? Did you see it happen multiple times right here? Okay. So but hey, maybe we could all learn something from that. Maybe we should be as ready to say, all right, okay, I see that you have a point. I'll go back and I'll rethink. That's a good thing for Christians to do. No, it's not just atheists who can profit from that.
So my question is, what your thoughts are on the parallels between the virgin birth narrative and the other ancient birth narratives regarding demigods or sons of God. And the context for this question is, I was reading the Justin Martyr's First Apology, and he also notes the parallels between Jesus' birth and the birth of Perseus. And so I don't think those similarities are tangential or
okay. I do think they're tangential, but let me first address the question about whether Horus or Tammuz or Inanna Ishtar or those kinds of things are parallels. And the answer is just an absolutely, as far as anything in history can be, it's a cast iron no. Virtually everything claimed in things like the Zeitgeist movie is the work of a crackpot wannabe Egyptologist named Gerald Massey, who didn't have any facility with the languages and just made a bunch of stuff up. I was just recounting to someone this evening an occasion where somebody who had run into some of this stuff was having dinner with me, and he said, well, have you ever read the Egyptian Book of the Dead? And I said, yes. And he said, oh. That was the end of that part of the conversation. It's actually a horrible map of misreadings of it. As far as the other things that Justin cites, first of all, what he is trying to say is that there are stories that have circulated in the pagan world that are taken with some level of seriousness. Why should they then find this something that they can dismiss out of hand? I don't know that he actually believed some of the particulars of those stories, but he's trying to point out that there's a double standard on the part of people who accept them, but then scoffingly discard the Christian story, as some people in the 2nd century did. So Celsus, for example, one of the critics of Christianity, has read the Gospels, and he dismisses the gospels because they're unworthy. I mean, your God is a carpenter. What's that? That's kind of stupid. I mean, that's not like a glorious thing. He should have been a king or something. And also, you guys just believed a bunch of tales told by silly women, right? I mean, he's very chauvinistic in the way that he puts that across. So I think Justin is maybe trying too hard to sort of fit the Christian story into a matrix of things that people around him were already inclined to take seriously. That does not mean that there are any very good parallels. Horus was not born from a virgin. Mithra was not born from a virgin. He was supposed to be born of a rock. It's not, when you actually get back to the primary sources and you look at those, it just dissolves. So I'm not impressed by those parallels. I can send you material on this. So get my email address and send me a note and say, hey, want that material on those alleged parallel pagan saviors, and I will send you a boatload of material. Dan, did I see you flagging me for something?
We usually go for 2 hours on the book club at 9, so we have 5 minutes for.
We got 5 minutes. All right.
For our
Probably
online.
have time for one more quick. I want to talk about what the next book club's going to be before we go, but I think we have time for one more quick question, although we haven't had a quick one yet. But if it's a quick question,
This is on me then.
yes.
Were there other? I may be misremembering. Were there other apostles from what was the town? Bethsaida, and does that affect the feeding of the 5,000 Philip story?
So I think
Andrew.
Andrew and Peter are also from there. They're certainly from the rim of the northern rim of the Sea of Galilee. But still, again, the curious question comes: why Philip? Of all of those people, why just him? Yeah, he could have turned to Peter, and as somebody else pointed out, how would we know? Peter's a rock star, right? But he picked Philip. There we go. I am glad there's somebody still awake in here. Thank you for that. All right, go ahead, James.
Yes. Well, I'm excited. First of all, I want to thank you for teaming up, letting us be a part of your meeting and joining this in. There's a Thursday night. Our book club are usually Thursday night, and it makes a conflict. So
Yeah, this was great, and
yeah.
thank you for partnering. This is fantastic.
Well, I've had a blast and appreciate it. And the book club, if you're interested, we have a separate website, atheistchristianbookclub.com. We have the videos of the last at least 3, maybe 4 years of book clubs you can watch. And we get some of the best authors, both Christian atheists. Gary Habermas, help me out. Who's the author? Gary Habermas. We've had
Stephen C. Meyer.
Stephen C. Meyer on the atheist side.
Michael Ruse.
Yeah, we've had some of the top names, and a repeat that's coming back for December. We're going to have Lawrence Krauss back. He's the author of the New York Times bestseller, A Universe from Nothing. That's what we discussed with him about maybe a year and a half ago. And he's coming back in December to talk about his new book this year, The Edge of Knowledge, Unsolved Mysteries of the Cosmos. So you can participate by Zoom. This is how we do most of our book clubs. Have your questions ready to go. And it's how many times would a Christian get a chance to ask one of the most recognized atheist names in the world a question about God? This is your chance. If you're at the book club, you can put your question in there and be able to interact with that. So we don't have the actual date nailed down yet, I don't think. So we just verified for sure he does want to do it in December. We will let you know at atheistchristianbookclub.com. I appreciate the 6 years or more now that we've been doing this, in that I want to be talking to people who are non-believers. I want to have relationships and friendships and be able to have gospel conversations with people. But a Christian, for me, I think for a lot of us Christians, a occupational hazard is we're so in our enclave, we're so tied into our silo that we not only do we not have gospel conversations. So for me, I sometimes don't have any conversations with non-believers for weeks. And so the book club for me is a way that I have on my calendar. Not only am I going to be able to talk to an atheist, I'm going to be able to talk to a number of atheists and some of the top atheists in the world, perhaps, that are authors. and they come to me. So this is a great way, but it also has helped me, I think, a little bit become a better thinker. I speak in churches all over the place and on all kind of apologetics conferences, and typically the churches like what I do, and in churches, all my arguments sound fantastic. But hey, at the Atheist Christian Book Club, you find out some of your ideas may be stronger than others. And so it's good. It's helpful for me, I think, to get some pushback. And I want to hear the best atheists in these meetings. I don't want to hear, and I want the best Christian authors to represent, my side of the story. So I want to encourage you, if you enjoyed this, to put it on your calendar to be part of that. Again, that's atheistchristianbookclub.com. Am I missing anything, Daniel? We covered everything. Well, thank you for being here, and for our Zoom audience for participating again as well. And we will see you next time.